He was never fatigued. He could go for maybe 2 or 3 weeks with only 3 or 4 hours sleep a night. He never claimed anything for himself. He never made any claims as to being a great healer or practitioner, seer, psychic, or anything of the sort. And I can assure you he did all of his writings just as you sit down and write a letter to someone. The material was never obtained through automatic writing, clairaudience, or clairvoyance, or anything of that sort. It wasn't necessary, because he knew these people whom he wrote about, just as he knew these great scientists and religionists, such as Dr. Steinmetz and Dr. Norwood. The latter was the famous clergyman in New York and one of Mr. Spaulding's very close friends. I think these facts may be of interest to you, although he probably wouldn't approve some things we are doing here this afternoon, because he realized that the physical form had so very little to do with the real life of the individual. As you will recall, he said, "The Christ is in each one of you," and that is the important thing that he wanted everyone to realize. Sometimes when people ask him, "How many masters are there in the United States?" he would say, "There must be at least 150 million masters in this country." That was the vision which he had, that each individual would become aware of his oneness with God and the Christ, and not just worship creeds and dogmas and sects. Each one of you, as individuals, if you were standing here in my place, could tell a little different story. No two stories would be alike as to what Mr. Spaulding meant to you as an individual, as a brother. But through the writings and his talks, answering your questions, he never put any limitation on time. I have known him to talk all night to a friend to help him over some mental or financial stumbling block. It was almost as if he had some great intuitive power that made him such a great scientist. He had studied in Heidelberg. He had worked in all the great scientific laboratories at one time or another, particularly in geophysical work. He was one of the early pioneers in the atomic work. He was particularly interested in helping the individual to help himself. Strange today, and the most difficult thing for people to understand, is that material possessions seem to mean so very little to him, because he realized, as Jesus did, the greatest thing that we can do when we are expressing on the physical plane here on this earth is to live the Christ life and get our attention away from limitations. Of course, that is what we have tried to do this afternoon, because we know that Mr. Spaulding is with us, as always, and that we have the continued opportunity of living the life as he did and in the way which he tried to show us. Now, I will begin with Chapter 1, and the foreword is real short. The following chapters are taken from lectures delivered by Mr. Spaulding in Southern California during the last 2 years of his life. Chapter 1 is the camera of past events. Now, this is kind of hard to believe, so stretch your imagination a bit. And there are a few people out there in YouTube land who are talking about taking pictures of the future and the past. So this is not quite as hard to grasp as you might think by a lot of people. Camera of past events. From the shadow of the Himalayas to the great vastness of the Gobi Desert, from New York to Central and South America, from San Francisco to the Philippines, Alaska, and Canada, come these experiences, findings, and revelations of our research work. We have been carrying on this work for over 40 years, first translating the records which we found in the Gobi, in Tibet, and in India. And this work has developed into an organization of about 26 men who are interested in and doing the work. The scientists are beginning to give us a great deal of credit. In fact, 2 years ago, they believed that with our new camera and what we call taking pictures of past events, we're going to be able to go back at least 1 million years showing the civilization that did exist at that time. Now that may seem rather remarkable, that we can go back and take absolute pictures of what happened thousands and thousands of years ago. There is a great deal being done along that line. We have the distinction of starting it because of Dr. Steinmetz's assistance. I work with Dr. Steinmetz myself, and during that whole time that I was with him, he put forth the question, we'll build a camera that will go into the past and pick up every past event if you wish it. He went on and delineated. Not only that, he drew the plans for that camera, and we followed through, and today we can say definitely that we can go into the past and pick up every past event. Of course, that becomes too cumbersome, but we select past events, and as I said, the scientists are admitting today and fully believing that we will go into the past events to the extent of 1,000,000 years. Our initial experience with the first camera was motivated by Dr. Steinmetz. I worked with Dr. Steinmetz for about 9 years, and he always maintained that we would eventually go back into past events and could get everything that happened, in fact, show what civilizations did, how they operated, and so on. And that has come to pass. Our first experience was with George Washington's inaugural address. That was in New York City, at what is now known as Federal Hall. In that picture, you can readily discern every one of the dignitaries who were on the platform with him, and George Washington is walking back and forth before the group giving his inaugural address. At that time, there wasn't even a still picture taken of that address or that group. Paintings were made, but no actual photographs. Now we have the actual picture with George Washington's voice on the soundtrack. Everyone said for a time that it was a fake because they claimed that we made it up in moving picture form. But it can now be shown with a regular moving picture mechanism. Then we went from that to the Sermon on the Mount. Now we know that Jesus, the man, was no different than we are. We have a complete history of that family's life for over 20,000 years and know that it was a well-established family, that he was a man of great influence, a very definite character. He was a man 6'2", and standing in a crowd, you yourself would select him and say, there is a man who will accomplish. And he did accomplish. History is bearing those things out today, and we are going back to this drama and getting the absolute words. We are very much interested in his whole life, and we followed it through at great length. Not only that, but we have known the man for a number of years, and we know today that he never passed through death. Now, Jesus of Nazareth never claimed for himself any more than what the ordinary person was capable of doing. That we know for certain. Not only that, he told us that death was overcome. The Sermon on the Mount has lived on and on as a spiritual masterpiece. People regard it as such today, more than ever before, and they are beginning to understand it and take it into their lives. We can show you in photography today that no one brought anything except the little boy with the 5 loaves and fishes. This isn't an allegory. If it were, we wouldn't find the boy there in that picture. Neither would we find the people there. All Jesus said was, sit down and prepare for the feast. And there was an abundance for all. Then again, we have the instant where the disciples said to Jesus, Master, there is need for bread, yet it is 4 months to the harvest. His answer was, look upon the fields. They are already white to harvest. And they are, right in the picture. With those pictures, we have been able to correct many mistakes that have been made. We worked for 8 years on the picture, the Sermon on the Mount, before we got the identity of the man, Jesus. We were always looking for a man of the description that Da Vinci had painted. We had an interesting experience in this connection. 3 of us were in the Vatican, and we were talking with a very elderly cardinal who asked us how we were getting along with the picture, the Sermon on the Mount. He was quite interested in what we were doing and told us that we could get a lot of information if we would take his card and go to the Louvre in Paris and